and this is From the Black Pool of Genius. Hello, how is everyone doing? I hope that you are in great health and spirits wherever you may be, and if not, working towards that rapidly. I'm your host, Sirius One, and the topic of today's show is multifold, doublefold. The first part is about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., born as Michael King, and that's an interesting history, but how his martyrdom has been, there has been an attempt to transform his image after death to be more pliable, more malleable, more palatable to Eurasian people in America and people that are so-called conservative. And the double part is conspiracies and so-called theories. I usually try not to put together conspiracy theory. I mean, you can theorize all day. Many things are theories, but to conspire simply means two or more people secretly planning to do something, and people conspire every day. But not to go on a tangent. So to start with Dr. MLK Jr. Now, I'm not going to lie, I haven't read a lot of his work. I've read Letter from a Birmingham Jail. I've read the book he last published, that was last published before his assassination, is Where Do We Go From Here? Community or Chaos. And it definitely gave me a different insight into the popular picture that was posed of the late Dr. Martin Luther King. He was always popularly portrayed as soft and weak and lenient and not for the rights of so-called black folks or African people of the diaspora. But when you read his work, especially that work, you'll see that Dr. King had a grasp on what was going on, and his politics were so-called quote-unquote radical, more radical than is popularly portrayed. And I use quote-unquote radical because to me, the conditions are radical. To accept the conditions that the majority of the world are under, and especially African people are under, so everyone else can thrive and benefit, is radically unacceptable. It's extremely radical. So to actually combat that and get from under that oppression is not radical at all. It's just common sense. But not to digress. So talking about Dr. King, because, usually Dr. King Day comes and people will use his I Have a Dream speech quotes, and people will take the most popular tidbits and, repost them and tweet them and post them on social media. But it's interesting to know when you research it, Dr. King was demonized not only by mass media for his assassination, but he was also ostracized by his support base, which was the black church. I mean, when you look up his history, you go to Atlanta, Georgia. He came from a black middle economic status family and background. He didn't have to choose the road that he chose. He actually went against being comfortable and just making money and preaching, and he actually spoke out for the people, especially African people that were oppressed, and even the whole concept of being nonviolent. Now, if you do your research, you'll find that while Dr. King did promote nonviolence as a tactic, this is a man that was protected by the Deacons of Defense, who were heavily armed. This was also a man that, towards the end of his years, applied for a license to carry and was denied. So for all the nonviolence that he promoted as a tactic, as strategy, he certainly was not a fool when it came to the conditions he was up against, and knowing and wanting to arm himself, or having people around him that were armed and prepared, for anything. So that is something else that is rarely touched on, even by people that know, the so-called radical side of Dr. MLK. And also the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, what was he doing at the time? Well, he was organizing the Poor People's Campaign. He was organizing sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, and he was there to organize a march over 6,000 to 7,000 people. But he was also leading a march on Washington. But this was going to be like a sit-in or like a campaign, sort of like what we have seen today, where people were protesting homelessness, people were protesting economic disparities, people were protesting the war in Vietnam. All these things which are fundamentally detrimental to the establishment and the status quo is something that he spoke out against, which wasn't popular. So again, to reiterate, he wasn't popular towards the end of his time, and the assassination of his character in the media led to people around him, walking away and saying he was out of his mind, and pretty much, leaving him defenseless and allowing ultimately for his assassination. So I just find that interesting, because you see that same tactic over and over again. People first try to destroy your image and your name and your reputation, and after that, and they have people around you questioning you and looking at you sideways, or just outright being difficult and opposing you, that were once aligned with you. Then it makes it easy for them to destroy you physically. And that is something that has been done over and over and over and over again. I even see it as far as this whole gender conflict that has gone on in the so-called black community in the last 30 to 50 years. But that's a topic I will touch on in another show, and that's going to be a heavy hitter. So, and not to make it quick, because I don't want to make this show too long, but just to quickly touch on everything to wrap it up. Dr. MLK, please read his last book, Where Do We Go From Here, Community or Chaos? I think that book is excellent in my opinion, but it's also insightful as far as what he was thinking and where he was at, as far as the problems and the issues that our people face. And prophetically, a lot of the things that he stated in that book as far as America's ultimate issue, or the so-called Negro problem, still being an issue, and the ultimate cancer of this nation, I'm paraphrasing, will come back to bite them, as we see today. I mean, the election of Donald Trump was a immediate reaction to the fear of whiteness losing its grip. Immediate reaction to the election of Barack Obama, and who I really didn't think benefited black people. I mean, you can't show me in any way where he benefited black folks, but in the imaginations and the fear and the trauma and the legacy of racism that Eurasians have imposed in this country, there is a fear of retaliation. There's a fear of, what goes around comes around. And they know ultimately they have, not all, but many have benefited and undermined indigenous people, but primarily African people, as far as the inception and the establishment and the continuance of this empire or country. So, and the last thing I'll touch on about Dr. King before I go into the conspiracies, because you will hear a lot of people talk about conspiracy theories and use it in a disparaging manner, or you're a conspiracy theorist. But if you look at the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, I mean, what is that anything other than a conspiracy? No theory, a conspiracy. Two or more people secretly planning to do something, whether that be malicious or beneficial. People conspire every day. But there's a great book that you might want to read by William Pepper called An Active State. And I want to say a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it was popular. It then became popularly known that there was a case against the United States by the King estate and they were ultimately found guilty of being liable in his assassination. Now, William Pepper goes into details about who was responsible for the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, April 4th of 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. And it came in, and before I get into who did it, it was shown that there were multiple teams there to carry out the job. One was a sniper team that was military, and the ultimate the person that assassinated Dr. King was Memphis Police Department sharpshooter. So, I mean, we have talk about defund the police. No pun intended. Ultimately, the police assassinated Dr. Martin Luther King in alignment with the United States military, in alignment with COINTELPRO, or the Counterintelligence program, the CIA, J. Edgar Hoover. So all these different entities work together to assassinate a man who was promoting nonviolence and peace and unity, and to a degree integration. Though his insight and his thoughts and his speeches were affecting the bottom line of economics in the military industrial complex, as far as the war in Vietnam, as far as the unification of oppressed people on a low economic run. It was causing people to question the mythos of the empire. I'll put it like that. So it's complex. I can't say that it is simple, but ultimately that is a conspiracy. It was secret. It was hidden. It took a lot of research and details and, painstaking years of toil to uncover who was responsible and why they were involved and how they did it. So, to jump into the next topic, this whole concept of conspiracy theory. Now, there's a myriad of conspiracies that I can run down, and I've actually talked about some in prior shows, as far as the Fair Housing Act and how so-called black folks were held out of low interest rates, low interest loans to gain housing, and pretty much frozen out of gaining any kind of economic stability as a collective in the United States. But I don't even have to touch on that. I mean, with the whole epidemic that's going on, quote unquote, and this force, issue of forcing the V, I call it the V on people. Let's get into the history of just 5, conspiracies, no theory, conspiracies in the last 60 years. We don't even have to go back 100 years, but we'll start with the oldest one, which a lot of people know about. That is the Tuskegee Experiments. At Tuskegee University, there was experiments done. Now, there's debate on if people were actually injected with venereal diseases or the venereal disease of syphilis, or they were just watched as they slowly deteriorated. Either or, the United States government, the professional medical professionals working at a historically black college all collaborated to watch black men die of syphilis, and they pretty much looked at the effects of syphilis on the human body without treating them, which is a violation of the medical workers, code of ethics. I think it's a Hippocratic oath. I'm paraphrasing, but they're supposed to work to heal and help people, not, watch them deteriorate for scientific knowledge against their will. That's just one. Everybody knows about Tuskegee, so they try to omit it and say, okay, other than Tuskegee, what can you say are conspiracy theories? So I'll give you another one. The forced sterilization of primarily so-called black women, African women in the United States. This was done in the early 20th century up into the 1970s. Over roughly 60,000 people were sterilized for all kinds of reasons due to a eugenics program that was ran in the United States, which was the foundation for Nazi Germany's, theories of eugenics and racial purity and only the strong survive and all that chaotic Eurocentric mess. But the forced sterilization of thousands of women, primarily black or African of African ancestry in the United States, from primarily in places like North Carolina, in Michigan, in California. This is something that there hasn't been a big light shed on it. I wish I could see a popular documentary on this issue. Maybe that's something I should work on. But this forced sterilization, this is eugenics. I'm not talking about Planned Parenthood as far as birth control and abortions. I'm talking about chemically sterilizing women so they couldn't have children because they were deemed less intelligent, and they were deemed economically disadvantaged and not able to prepare or take care of children. This is a conspiracy. It was secretly done. It was done, under cloak and veil, and it was exposed, against the will and the wishes of the people that were doing it. So this is a conspiracy. People conspired together to sterilize these women. Okay. And please research these things. All these things are researchable. They're not hidden anymore. You can find all kinds of documentation and information on them. Another one I talked about in a previous show, COINTELPRO, which is short for Counterintelligence Program. Now, this program was established by the CIA. J. Edgar Hoover, fame, notable cross-dresser, and low-key passer, because it was said that he had African heritage in him, but that must have been a self-hate. He must have hated himself so much that he wanted to destroy anything that was African. In a memo that was intercepted, it said that, they wanted to prevent the rise of a black messiah, a black nationalist or so-called black radical movements. They listed Student Nonviolent Coalition as radical. Student Nonviolent Coalition, SNCC. This I don't want to say industry, but this counterintelligence program spent almost $500 to $600 million to destabilize black people and movements and organizations and individuals who simply, for the most part, just wanted equality. They didn't want to dominate. They didn't want to take over. They didn't want to overthrow. They simply wanted equality. And some wanted integration. And they destabilized, destroyed, defamed, assassinated them. We could run down the names from Malcolm X, who had informants in his organization, one right by the stage when he was assassinated. I forget his name, but this man later went on to infiltrate the Black Panthers. You have there's a movie coming out about Fred Hampton and how they were infiltrated and he was assassinated. Martin Luther King, we talked about previously, who one of the first people to check on him when he was shot was an informant for the police department. All these things could be researched. So I'm simply saying that this is conspiracy. I talked in the previous shows. I talked about the drug trade, in Nixon and Ehrlichman, and how they pretty much promoted black folks as being the primary drug users and sellers, when the reality shows that the largest percentage and population numerically, the largest number of drug users and sellers have always been Eurasians or white Americans. So this sullying of the image, this negative portrayal of black folks as drug dealers and abusers, caused a spike in the prison rates, which we still see today. A targeting of black folks for crimes resulting or relating to drugs. But I talked about that in another show. So the last couple of points I'll touch on real quick. You have the Holmesburg experiment. Now, a lot of people don't know about this, but Holmesburg prison it's in Philadelphia, PA, in the Northeast. It's still there today, and I want to say in the 60s and 70s, Johnson & Johnson, the United States military, and the prison experimented on primarily black inmates, and they pretty much used them as guinea pigs for their products, with no compensation. And this was done secretly, and it was exposed in a book called Acres of Skin. It's something that you can read and research yourself. But that's just one of many, I'm sure, situations like that, but it was exposed. And recently there has been the issue of the USDA, or United States Department of Agriculture, against black farmers, or versus black farmers, and black farmers suing the USDA for discrimination. There has been a 90% drop in black farmers since 1910 up until 1997. There's also shown that recently black farmers were given defective or faulty seeds, and which caused low yields in their crops growing. I mean, there's several instances of, black farmers' lands being confiscated and targeted for confiscation, while white farmers were targeted at a lesser rate, a lesser rate that is so drastic that it's clear that there's discrimination apparent. So these are conspiracies, no theory. We can talk about, in the last point I'll talk about is Flint, Michigan, and the water crisis there, which is something that is prevalent in most areas where black folks are predominant, especially inner cities or urban centers, I'll say. This was a inside job with the water being diverted from one area into the next, and that water was polluted, and it was denied over and over again. And it took the people to do their own independent review and research and agitating to expose that their water was polluted. Now, there's all kinds of research coming out now about how a lot of these urban centers have water that is polluted, that is heavy in all kinds of mercury and agriculture runoff and manufacturing and plant runoff. And it just so happens that these areas are in places that so-called black folks dominate, but there's no conspiracy, right? You're a conspiracy theorist, or white man holding you down. I mean, we have to be real about the opposition that we're facing. Who, what, when, where, why, how, and how do we get up out of it? So that's just my, quick tidbits. I could go on so much longer. I can go into so much detail, but I want people to research. Please prove me wrong. But I just hate how people divulge and people divert and use misinformation and all kinds of shaming tactics to say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Do your research. There's conspiracies, no theory. But that's my topic for today. What do you think? Feel? Know? Share? Believe? Remember to like, share, subscribe, share, like, and subscribe. And I will see you on the next one. Peace.